What is up, Sales Dev Squad? Thanks so much for tuning in to a very special episode here. Huge thank you to Annaleah Glick for hooking us up here. Martin Malloy, he's a content marketing lead over at Rollbar. He has experience being in content marketing, content management for a lot of tech companies in the Bay Area. Before that, he did a lot of work with like writing and editing, so we'll definitely unpack his background a little bit further. But Martin, thank you so much for hopping on here, and Annaleah, if you're listening out there, thank you so much for hooking this up.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I guess, Martin, I know we chatted a little bit earlier this week. I think it's really fascinating with the direction that content marketing is headed in this post-pandemic world, and I think you and I both agree that SaaS organizations that are better aligned on the marketing and sales front tend to have more success. So just wanted to pick your brain, I guess. Do you mind just giving us like a quick 2 to 3 minute overview of like, you know, how you fell into content marketing and what you were doing before with a lot of like your writing work?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, so I've always been like a bit of a creative kid. And I think the area where I sort of started to excel, or maybe teachers told me I was excelling, or I was carving out my niche, was always writing. And I've always enjoyed it. And it's sort of one of those things that comes a bit naturally to me, I guess. But I didn't really know what that meant. So like when I was in school, it's sort of like you could either be a creative writer or you could be a journalist. Sort of like those are the only two tracks, more or less. And so I thought I'd become a journalist, but for some reason early on, I decided I didn't want to. So I applied to like journalism school, got into a couple, and decided I didn't want to do that. I can't tell you why. I just thought like, nah, I don't want to do that. So I went to NYU and just did English, minored in creative writing. And then the irony is I started doing some journalism, but more, I think maybe I felt I didn't want to do like, you know, like local news kind of reporting. But I've always had a huge interest in music and films. So like I started sort of dipping my feet into that world when I was in New York. I tried out publishing as well. But it was when I got an internship at Wenner Media, which I don't know if that actually exists anymore. But at the time, they owned 3 magazines, which is Rolling Stone, Us Weekly, and Men's Journal. So I really wanted to get an internship at Rolling Stone on the editorial side, which I did not, but I got accepted on the communication side, and I was kind of bummed, and I thought, well, whatever, that's still pretty cool, so I'll go over there. And that's when I first, must have been a sophomore or something, that's when I first sort of was like, oh, okay, there's like this whole side of like marketing and communications. And there's actually a lot of creative work going on over here. You know, it's not just like interviewing the bands or the actors or whatever Rolling Stone does, but like, you know, they're actually selling everything that these magazines are doing. And so they knew, like I had 3 bosses from each magazine, and they knew what I was interested in. So they started feeding me all of like the cool creative work, like writing press releases, helping to put together pitches to other media outlets about something they were working on. So I got to do a lot of that, and that sort of exposed me to something else. And at the time, yeah, like I did some other publishing houses internship, and I thought maybe I'd go into publishing, and I kind of like this better. And so I sort of started going down that track, and then I moved out to the Bay Area, did some agency work and like more PR. But I remember at the time, content marketing like wasn't a thing back then at all. Like if I had been a marketing major, I'm sure they wouldn't have really talked about content marketing as like it's like a thing.
It's still kind of new, I feel, in a way.
Yeah, it is still kind of new, and it's still evolving a lot. And so I just remember thinking like, I really want to write for a company's blog. Like that's all it was. And so I started doing some freelance writing. I was also doing, when I first moved to San Francisco, a lot of film writing. That was like my sort of like side hustle. So I was doing that for like 7 or 8 years, like reviewing movies, attending all the local festivals, you know, writing news articles about upcoming events in San Francisco revolving around that, doing some interviews with people from like the Film Society, around like the International Film Festival, anything else. sometimes when an actor or someone would come through, I might get to interview them. But I started to also do some freelance work for like companies and started to actually do some blog writing, create some content for them. And then really, I think what really launched it is I started working as an editor at Scripted, which was sort of, they were a pretty hot startup at the time. And basically, they were like a writer network. Like you could hire them to help you with any writing help. So anything from like actually writing blogs or writing white papers to like actually writing like website copy. Like I remember one of the projects I was working on was for like a party city type of website, and they needed like 500 or 1,000 descriptions
Uh,
of products. And so I was reviewing
it's
all
like
these writers that
copywriting.
had been sourced from the network, editing all these product descriptions based on all the input they had given their account manager about like their tone and voice or anything else like that. um, and so that's sort of like where I first started like focusing on that kind of work more, and then from there I went in-house, started working at a company called Pulse Point, then went to PandaDoc, which is like one of my first really early startup experiences. And then after that got into a firm, and that sort of really jump started my career, because I got into a firm when they were still pretty early, and not as well known, and now they're household names. So and yeah, content has just evolved a lot since then. So it used to be just like company had a blog, um, but I think it's much bigger than that now.
So, in your opinion, what is the objective of content marketing? Like, what do you strive to achieve through the work that you do for your SaaS company right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think at the like the short answer is it's a part of marketing. So really, it's to drive revenue. I mean, that's anyone who works in marketing, that's their job, is to help drive revenue. But more specifically, I think content is, in order to do that, um, it's about stories and narratives, and it's about putting those stories and narratives out there, and it's about figuring out what they are, how that fits into your company's objectives, vision, mission, all of that, and actually putting it into something that people can consume, and something that's going to pique their interest, um, something that's going to build trust with them, especially early on in the funnel, just to create an awareness of what your company is, what they're about, why you should trust them. But content goes all the way down from the top of the funnel to the bottom. So I've been involved in sales enablement content as much as I have top of funnel. Some companies sometimes actually separate those. Like you might have a sales enablement team, um, but really content is just about building trust with your prospects and even with your customers. I think actually content is as important for like current customers as it is for prospects. It's like a never ending cycle.
So, is the type of work that you do more related to acquiring new customers, or would you say is it more like just affiliated with the brand and what sort of resource the brand wants to be for the customers? Or I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a little bit of both, and it sort of depends on like where the company is in their like life cycle, like how old or young they are, but also what goals. So I'd certainly say a lot of what I do, like especially Rollbar right now, where it's still a pretty young company. Like when I was at a firm and they were only a couple years old, a lot of it was definitely prospect driven, like help drive new leads, help build the pipeline. And so a lot of what I was putting together was like case studies or customer stories, telling, I do that, a lot of that now, trying to get the word out about how current customers are using us to give prospects a better idea of how they could use us. But also, I think brand awareness is actually a huge part of that, because I mean, to me, it's kind of like almost too dumb to say, but if the larger top of funnel you have, the more that'll get through to the bottom. Um, because it's not just like, if you find 100 people, 50 people will actually become qualified leads or something, but it's also, building brand awareness is also about, well, maybe someone sees you and they tell their friend about it, and then they tell their friend about it, and turns out they're actually looking for a solution similar to yours. So yeah, the bigger brand awareness you can have, I mean, just, the more people you reach, but it's also about, brand awareness is also just about recognition in general. So, like, I feel like part of my job is, the first question I don't want someone to ask an AE and SDR is, who are you? I want the first question to probably be like, what can you do for me? So, I want that awareness that, yeah, I've heard of you, I've read about you, I've seen you. What can you do for me? If the first question is, who are you? Then, marketing and me haven't probably done our job really well. It's why billboards still exist, along the Bay Bridge, like, Snowflake for I feel like so many years they owned a lot of those billboards, and now today they're, I don't know, like $100 billion valuations that they've gone public, something like that. So all of that awareness has obviously helped them. And so I see brand awareness, just, I think it's just as important as actually when you're actually getting into the pipeline. How do you actually move people and qualify them? It starts with the top.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that top of funnel is super important. Like you said, like your customers should know who you are by the time an SDR gives them a call, or it should be a priority, and something that has a strong presence. My question for you, Martin, is what is your thought process around like creating contextual and relevant content? Because there's obviously a lot of content out there that companies are distributing. How do you strive to make something that is actually going to be relevant and actually going to be helpful for your intended audience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like the upside of 2020 for like content marketing and brand marketing has been that there's a bigger need for it, because everyone's at home. But I also think that the challenge, not just this year, but in recent years, is like there's just so much noise. There's everyone, every company has their own little, basically newspaper. So I think the way I try to cut through that noise is like, one, I'm still trying to do this, is be more innovative in the type of content. Like, I still think that written content is king, but companies have podcasts. I built a podcast at Tradeshift. We tried that out. Um, doing more videos, things like that. So there's different ways to create interactive content now, like microsites and landing pages. So there's a lot of different ways to create content. But I still think, I mean, the quickest, cheapest, and probably most effective way is still written content. And so the way I try to cut through that noise is just to create something that I think, you know, the intended audience will actually care about, and not make it fluffy. A lot of the companies I've worked at, I'm not necessarily the expert in that field. So, at a firm, I don't necessarily have a background in retail or finance. At Rollbar, we have a developer audience. That's who's using us. We have a tool for developers to improve their code. I don't have a developer background. But what I do know is I do know how to tell narratives, and how to use content, and how to put that into the marketing funnel and cycle. So for me, like, it's always finding those subject matter experts. It's about, like at Rollbar, it's like talking to our own engineers, like, you are our target audience. What do you care about? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis here? And what's interesting to you is going to be interesting to our audience. So I try to be like that internal journalist. I try to like find those stories that I think are interesting, or going to connect with the people who want to read it. And at the same time, I try to tell our customer stories. I try to get, like, at a firm, I would get our customers involved in content creation, whether it was just actual case studies, or working with our communications team to actually get them to go out and talk to the media, having them write bylines for us, things like that. So that's how I try to cut through the noise, is not just create fluff. And I think the number one thing is to always think about your audience, like, not what you as a company want to say or want people to believe, like, what do they want to hear? Because it's really easy to get sucked into your own sort of world. Like, at Rollbar, we talk about code improvement every day. So it's really easy to think, oh, that's what everyone wants to hear about, the things we talk about every day. We're knee deep in it. But sometimes you have to step back and think like not everyone is thinking or talking about this every day. So things that we may find are boring or not boring, and things we may find exciting may not actually be exciting because people don't have the context that we do. So sometimes we do like bridge that education gap for the audience as well, because they'll be like, I don't understand why that's cool. It's like, well, this is cool because, so you actually have to educate the audience a little bit too. And I see that as part of my job as well, is bridging that education, and getting people to think a little bit differently a lot of times.
That's awesome. That's really powerful. Do you interact a lot with your sales team or SDRs? I feel like there's a
Mhm.
huge opportunities for marketing to collab specifically with SDRs just because the information that you gather as a marketer, I feel like is important for SDRs, and then what SDRs are hearing on the front ends might be helpful for what you do. So I'd love to hear your just like experience just being more collaborative with sales and how that's been beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, like everyone in marketing, yeah, I work very closely with sales. Like right now at Rollbar, I was on a, weekly sales call this morning. I'm on, like, we have weekly sales enablement sessions, so I'm always part of that, whether I'm just listening in or I might do a presentation, I might share something. But yeah, it's really important to be close to sales. I mean, I certainly want to know, for instance, at the very least, like what they're hearing on calls, like what objections are they getting? What questions are they getting most often? So we can help get ahead of those. But so it's certainly interesting to hear like what they're running into, what they're hearing at the front lines. So it's important for us to know. And then if we put together any piece of content, if we're product marketing and I work together on a new sales deck, or if we work on something, some piece of sales enablement for them, like is it working? Is it not working? I remember when I was at a firm, we launched a new sort of product when I was there. And I think it was every week for the first month or two, me and the product marketing manager that was in charge of the release, we would sit down every Friday with the salespeople that were involved with selling it. And we would just go round robin and basically say, how did your calls go this week? What worked? What didn't work? And then we would just adjust our messaging and storytelling based on that. Like someone might say, hey, I know this is like the number one thing you said that would work and connect. Like I said it on 10 calls and didn't work at all.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's really important to know to know from that perspective.
So when you use this phrase storytelling, I feel like I kind of know what you mean because I understand that creative side, but maybe for someone who's just starting to dabble into like that creative part of their brain or just start exercising that, how can we practice storytelling or train our minds to think of in a way that is like a story? Because I feel like that is where a lot of the emotional side kicks in.
Well, I think humans are naturally both storytellers and they want to engage with stories. I mean, I think everything we do all the time is just part of a story or is a story. Um, so I just think it's ingrained in us, but a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that. I mean, every advertisement you see on TV, that's a story. Like, people watch the ads during the Super Bowl. Each ad is telling some sort of story.
Yeah.
And it wants you to connect with that story. If it's funny, it wants you to connect with the humor. Um, so you sort of like, oh, they're funny, maybe I'll like their beer. Um, but I think as well, I think in layers of storytelling as well. Like I think that companies have sort of like at the top, like a single story they're telling, maybe two stories, but they're really telling like one single story. So I look at it as like how can I break up that story into smaller stories? Like maybe it's like I think of a year or even longer as like a collection of short stories. So how can I fit all of these narratives under that like single umbrella of the story? So like at Rollbar, our story is we help developers uh, build software quickly and painlessly through continuous code improvement. So how can I break that continuous code improvement story down into like what does that mean? So we have storytelling pillars about being continuously learning, continuously predictive, um, and continuously proactive. So for me, it's like I look at every year, every time we're planning, like for a quarter, like what story am I going to tell this quarter? How does it layer up into that larger story?
Hmm.
And so and then next quarter, how I build on that, like what's the next chapter in the story. But I think, every time a salesperson gets on a call, they're telling a story in some way. They're telling the story of like, there's the classic beats that you hit a story like, what is the state of things today? What is the problem? What is the solution? And then, at the end, it's like, oh, and by the way, our product is part of that solution, or,
Yeah.
our service. So there's really like, there's like a lot of theories out there about like there's only so many ways to tell a story. I think Kurt Vonnegut had a big thesis about that. Like there's only X number of stories you can tell. So for me, it's not really the like how you tell the story. It's sort of like or the what the story is. It's how you tell it. Like I'm not a person that gets too upset about like spoiler alerts. Like people are like spoiler alerts, and for me, I'm like, well, when I watch a movie or read a book, like I can sort of see ahead, like how it's gonna happen. So, if the end, if the guy and the girl get together, like that happens like in 90% of the stories. I'm more interested in how they got there. Like I
Hmm.
didn't see that coming, but I knew what the end result was going to be. So I think that's how people should think about stories, and people connect emotionally. When they're buying, whether it's business software or consumer products or whatever, like they connect emotionally. That's why they connect with the funny advertisements on Super Bowl. They connect with it not because they think the product is cool, but because they think that story was funny or sad or engaging. And then they have like a connection to it
Hmm.
and go, oh, they got me. Like I felt that connection to that beer commercial, so maybe next time I'll go have that beer.
And that's like really the science behind like what a brand really is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, brand. I mean, brand. I believe that the strongest product doesn't always win. It's usually the strongest brand. And it's the company that's able to tell that story the best. Um, it's not always, there's so many examples of good products, good like business software, good just cool things that came out, inventions that like didn't make it, and you look back and you wonder why. And a lot of it comes down to their marketing or their storytelling. Like they just couldn't connect with people on a certain level. So I think that the companies that usually wins are the ones that can actually do that better.
Well put. Well put. Just have a quick question here. I know we talked about this earlier this week, and it's something that I've been receiving a lot from a lot of content creators out there. Is this idea of like how do you maximize your output, your distribution, without having to rethink of new ideas consistently? And I know you mentioned that like you don't really have to reinvent the wheel, just like break the wheel apart and reuse it again. Do you mind just like unpacking like your thoughts on like repurposing existing stuff rather than having to think that you have to consistently create new things?
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest things that comes up is like what's the next idea, and it can feel daunting. But I also think like one of the hardest parts of my job is saying the same thing over and over in different ways and finding like a refreshing way to say it. Because like I said, a company really only has one story to tell. They're selling probably one product. There's only so many things you can say about the benefits of that product. Um, but yeah, I think and a lot of great content marketers say the same thing. Like repurposing content is like the number one thing you should do, because not only do you get the most out of the least amount of work, but you also are able to, like any marketing, like you want to be everywhere and anywhere all at the same time. So if you have a digital ad, if you have a LinkedIn, paid ad, if you have a billboard, those should all align in some way. If they're all saying different things, it's just going to confuse people. Like, well, I thought that company did this, but then I saw that billboard and it said something different. So that's why you want to have that consistent message. But the way I think about it is, yeah, reuse everything as much as you can. So if we create an ebook, and it's 20 pages, like break out a chapter of that, turn that into a webinar, turn that into a webinar series. Then you follow up with those people and say, thanks for for attending, like download this ebook where you can learn more, turn that into blog posts, maybe you make a social campaign out of it, like extend the life of that as long as you can, because not everyone's going to download that ebook, not everyone's going to attend that webinar, not everyone's going to see that ad. So if you just create, one ebook and all you do is do an email campaign out of it, it's kind of like, well, now you have to think of like, we're going to do a webinar next month. What's a good idea? We got to think of something different. And my thing is, people don't buy based on their first interaction usually, right? Like usually for me, I ignore, if an SDR is trying to get me to buy something for my company, I'll ignore like the first 5 emails because I'm like, I'm not in the market for this. But, the more persistent they are, and maybe then I see a, targeted ad to me, eventually it starts to seep in a little bit. And I'm like, this sounds interesting. Maybe I'll have a listen. So if they had just, sent me one email saying download our ebook, I would have deleted it and never, heard of them again. But if they retarget me with an ad saying download this ebook, and then if they, I see an ad on TV about the same story, like that's when it starts to seep in for you, right? And the more you see it too, there's like a legitimization part of it that I always talk about. And I think that part of it is really important for customers too, not just prospects. Like customers want to feel like they're working for a company that's legitimate. They want to see, if they see a TV ad for a company that they just bought for their office, they're like, oh, that's cool. Like we work with them. So that's why I think it's, repurpose as much as you can, because if you just retarget them with a single ad and they don't click on it, like, maybe next time they will, or maybe when they get the email, they will. So you got to saturate people because there's so much noise that you want them to have all those opportunities. And maybe by the 10th try, they'll open that email. Maybe by the 10th try, they'll attend that webinar. So, I got to build it up for them too. There's like, why should they listen to you just because you send a single email or you just get an ad on LinkedIn? Like,
Yeah.
And so that's why, break those stories up. There's different ways to tell it. You can create a video out of a blog post. You can turn a blog post into a video. You can collect 5 blog posts into an ebook. You can break up an ebook into 5 blog posts. So it's all about just repurposing, because like I said, I don't think you should be thinking about what new stories to tell as much as how to blanket that story you've already put together for the next 3 months, 6 months.
Yeah. There's so many different avenues. I'm always struggling to find the answer to this question here. Like obviously sales and marketing, very similar, but also very different in the way they achieve their end goal, which is obviously revenue. How would you describe the difference between sales and marketing per se?
In my experience, I think the best way to describe it is marketing people are more long-term thinking and sales are more immediate. So, sales has their quota, they're trying to hit their numbers for every quarter. And so, they're looking at what can I do tomorrow? How can I get this call on the books tomorrow? How can I close this deal? How can I do that? Whereas marketers, I feel like we're more looking at
Big picture.
Like how do we build a pipeline for next quarter or for next year? If we start running this program now, we'll give them a good pipeline in 2 quarters. Or, if we start juicing our SEO now, that's going to help us rank next year. So I think that's like the biggest division I usually see, is like sales is looking for like results tomorrow, whereas marketers are trying to build up like a robust foundation to help feed that pipeline for them down the road. And we know that like if we run a webinar tomorrow, that's not necessarily going to give a huge pipeline build. But if we run a webinar program over time, those people start to fill the pipeline. So I feel like that's the biggest difference in the mindset that I've seen.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for that. I guess to kind of wrap things up here, Martin, for anyone listening out there that was inspired by just the way you think and like content marketing, and they sort of just want to practice it a little bit more, whether through like their personal brand or like an SDR like myself who wants to dabble more into that side of things. Are there any exercises or any advice or tips that you have for them to just start practicing those skills?
I mean, just read a lot, like anything, the more you practice at something, the better you get. If you want to get better at writing, just do a little bit of writing every day. And for salespeople, like they do a lot of that and they don't realize it. They're writing emails, they're putting together pitches, they're, updating the sales deck. So they're
Yeah.
already doing a lot of this themselves, and they're already, they're fitting that sales deck to tell their story that they want to tell. Every salesperson, that has their own version of their pitch. So yeah, just, read as much as you can. I am actually not a huge reader of like sales and marketing type books or things. I just like to read a lot of nonfiction, sometimes fiction, just understanding how stories are told and like what's
Mhm.
interesting, what catches you, what you can apply that anywhere.
That's such a great advice. Thanks so much, Martin. I guess for anyone listening out there who wants to pick your brain a little bit more on content marketing, where is the best place to find you?
Yeah, you can probably find me on LinkedIn. Probably the best place.
That's where we connected here. But Martin, I learned so much here. Again, Annaleah, if you're listening out there, thanks for making this connection. Sales Dev Squad, go out there and think like a marketer, or hit up Martin with any questions, and we will catch you all in the next one.